Good morning and welcome to this morning's webinar. This is the final in a series of webinars that HFMA are running on the theme of Take Control. My name is Guy Mitson. I'm the e-learning manager for HFMA, and this webinar is titled Dealing with and Managing Change. So as many of you will be aware, Take Control is the HFMA theme for 2011. The Take Control initiative aims to provide an integrated package of support, enabling you to take control of your careers, ensuring that you are fully equipped to face the future, whatever that may bring. So a few quick points of housekeeping before we move on. Audio options. I'm hoping you can all hear me okay. Today's webinar you can listen to via the telephone or through your computer speakers. The quality of the audio is going to be better via the telephone. The number and PIN code can be found on the right-hand side of your screen under the webinar's audio tab. The webinar is going to last about an hour, the main body of which is going to be the presentation itself, followed by a Q&A session. Therefore, can I ask if you think of any questions as we're going along, please type them into the question box. The question box is at the bottom tab of your webinar panel. We want these sessions to be as interactive as possible. I'm then going to group these questions together and pose them to Duncan towards the end of the webinar during the Q&A. And finally, a recording of this webinar along with the slides used today will be available on our website in the next day or so. You will all be emailed the details when it's ready to download. So joining us on the webinar today is Mr. Duncan Brodie. Duncan is the sole Director of Goals and Achievements, a leadership development company that works with accountants and health professionals. Duncan climbed the career ladder from a 15-year-old accounts clerk all the way to a finance director in the NHS, and is perfectly placed to understand the challenges of change within individual careers as well as the industry as a whole. So it's true to say that change is all around us, and seemingly no more so than now with government cutbacks, shake-ups in the NHS, and times of great economic upheaval. But it's also worth remembering, and I quote from Greek philosophy, that change is in fact the only constant. So to deliver today's presentation, a man who has embraced change and made it work for him, Mr. Duncan Brodie. Over to you, Duncan.
Well, thank you, Guy, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. Firstly, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's made the time to come along to these series of webinars. It's, a tough time for everyone right now. I think we would all acknowledge that. And it's great that we've included dealing with and managing change in this series. So let's start by taking a look at what we're going to cover in this webinar today. The first thing we're going to look at is how we respond to change, because I think what it'd be fair to say is lots of people think about change and they think about it in the context of all the change models and what methodologies we should use. But in this webinar, we're going to focus on the kind of human side, really, of change. So the first area we're going to focus on is how people respond to change. Then I'm going to introduce a little formula, which is E plus R equals O. And you're probably sitting wondering, what's this formula about? All will be revealed as we go through the webinar. Next, we want to look at why we want to increase the pets and reduce the ants when we're dealing with change. And again, lots of jargon, lots of terminology, but everything is going to be revealed as we go through the session this morning. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about perspectives and why perspectives really matter when we're in a period of change, because I think it's really easy to get stuck, to feel completely lost in times of change, and I can talk firsthand from that in my own experience. We'll talk a little bit about the importance of being methodical. As accountants, we are very methodical, but very rational. And I think it's important that when we're in a change situation, that all of those core skills that we've actually got don't get lost when we come to deal with change. I want to talk a little bit towards the end about using change as a bit of a catalyst, because I think sometimes it's easy to see change as being kind of the end of the world, but the reality is it sometimes can be the catalyst. It certainly has been a catalyst for me, and I will share a little bit later on how change for me, and a big change for me, was actually a catalyst. And finally, as Guy said, we want to leave some time for Q&A because I suspect that on this topic, this is one of the areas where perhaps we'll have more questions because people have got that doubt, that uncertainty, which is completely natural. Okay, so let's start off with a bit of a reality check. I think people often think that change is something out of the ordinary, but if you think about it, it's happening all the time. When you were coming to work this morning, you probably had to change your course when you were driving, or if your trains weren't running to plan, you maybe had to change to a different route from what you were expecting. And most of the time, just a bit like when you're an experienced driver, we deal with it unconsciously. We don't think too much about it. But the funny thing is, when it comes to organisational change, it seems to be a hugely different. People seem to respond completely differently. They don't just take it in the flow when it comes to organisational change. So what I want to do is to get us started and get a little bit of interaction, a little bit of involvement, is in the question box on the, you'll be able to see, I would like you to start to type in some words or statements that in your experience best describe how people respond to organisational change. These might be your own words, or they might be words that you've heard others say, or statements you've heard others say. So just go ahead, pop those into the question box, and then we'll start taking a look at some of the things that people are actually hearing people say in relation to change. So just go ahead and do that, and we can see what we've got. So some people are talking about anxiety, resistance, anger, uncertainty, tiredness, fear, reluctance, burnout, optimism, excitement, we're cynical about it, personal interest, energy, we're resigned to it's an opportunity. Here we go again, yep, familiar one. Okay, so just give you another 10 seconds. Resentment, face fits, you're okay. Okay, so it's 5 seconds. Denial. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, a lot of people are talking about being undervalued. They're talking about nobody really caring about them. So thanks for participating in that. Really appreciate that. And let me just share with you what I've seen as some of the common reasons or responses that I've heard when it comes to change. The first thing I've heard people saying, well, this is all just a waste of time, it's not necessary, it's all just going through the same old stuff over and over again, we've been here before. And I think, for people in PCTs, for people in SHAs right now, actually I've got a lot of sympathy with that point of view. If we think about the number of changes that's been made over the period of time, it could be natural for people to say, actually, it's not necessary. The second reaction you might get in relation to change is, well, actually, this is not going to work. This is just all a waste of time. We're going to throw a lot of time, energy, effort. It's not going to work. It's not going to make any difference. All of that kind of stuff. And sometimes that could be, true. But often we've got to distinguish between what won't work or what we won't make work. So for me, something that won't work is factual. It's evidence-based. Something that we're not going to let work is not factual. It's evidence-based. It's actually based around resistance, which some people mentioned is something that comes up. People talk about it not being fair. You know, it's not fair. We've been asked to make these changes yet again. We've got all the upheaval, we've got all the uncertainty. It's just not fair. And again, something that you would expect, completely natural and exactly what you'd expect. Patient care is going to suffer. You know, we always get this point, don't we? Whenever we have a change situation, the immediate reaction is that patient care is going to suffer. And it may suffer, it may not, but we often just get a natural reaction in relation to that. People sometimes say, we can't change, you know, we can't change, our circumstances are so different that we couldn't possibly change. People might come out with, well, you don't understand what it's like in my part of the organisation, you don't understand what it's like for me personally, you don't understand how much I need this job. There's a whole bunch of things that can actually really lead to people saying things that they don't understand. And of course, if you're a finance person, you're trying to influence the change agenda. Nobody's saying that everyone in finance knows the ins and outs of every part of the organisation. But we're smart people, we understand how to ask questions, we understand and can evaluate the consequences of certain things. It's a waste of time. You know, people will say, well, you know, we should be focusing our efforts on actually delivering care and making a change rather than wasting time on a whole bunch of structural change. So, you know, again, completely natural reaction. People talk about it being too hard, and let's face it, you know, any kind of change is difficult. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that there's no degree of difficulty. But one of the things I do know about finance people, having worked with lots of them, been in finance for, you know, many years, 25 years in total, what I noticed is that, you know, people in finance are good at rising to challenge. No one wants it. You know, people say that no one wants it. And I think that this is an interesting one for us all, and it's one we all need to be alert to, because if we think about it, look at the technology we're using today, and we look back to the time when computers were first introduced. I think it was Bill Gates that said something about, you know, he couldn't ever envisage anybody wanting more than 64 kilobytes of memory. And look at the size of the machines we've got nowadays. We've got things now like 24-hour supermarket shopping. And again, I can remember the days when you stood in the long queue. So, I mean, we, or the people who are in the change situation, might not want it, but maybe the population at large, the service users, want it. And another one that you often get is, you know, this is just the latest fad, and this is somehow going to disappear. It's a thing that seems to be flavour of the month, transformation, saving lots of money. But, you know, I've been through this so many times before, and I've seen this all before. And all the points that people made about, you know, cynicism, anxiety, just fed up, etc. These are really all valid points too, because I think that there are people, you know, I was in the health service long enough to know that this GP commissioning changes that have been proposed are not a million miles different to when we had GP fund holding. And there's probably lots of people in that same situation who are sitting thinking, you know, actually, is this just the latest fad? And here's the reality in any kind of change situation. What I've found is there's one question, and the number one question people want answered is this one. What does it mean for me? Because at the end of the day, first and foremost, we think about things, we think about change, we think about situations in the context of what does it actually mean for me. You know, we might dress it up in different ways about being concerned about what matters to patients, what matters to colleagues, what matters to you know, the work I do. But the reality is most people, first and foremost, want to know, what does it mean for me? That is the question that people want answered. So what we've got now is a poll, and you'll see on your screen that we have a poll which has actually got 4 options which we're going to ask you to vote on. And the poll question is, which of the following 4 options best describes why people respond negatively to change? And what you've got is, you've got 4 choices. Choice number 1 is fear. Choice number 2 is you're comfortable with how things are. Choice number 3, it's imposed on them. Or choice number 4, they've had a bad experience in the past. So just go ahead. I'm going to give you a minute or 2 just to cast your votes on this and see what is shown as the most common one. So just go ahead, give your vote on that. And there is no right or wrong answer here. This is just your own thoughts on this particular one. Okay, so I'm going to give it 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so I'm going to close the poll at that point, and what we'll see is from the poll results, 52%, by far the biggest category, is fear. You know, completely normal, completely normal human reaction to a situation like that. The second area that people are saying is that people are saying the reason why they respond negatively to it is because they feel it's imposed on them. It's been dropped on them. 28% going for that. 16% are going for, well, we're comfortable with how things are at the moment, so comfortable with how things are. And 3% are saying they've had a bad experience. But the overwhelming majority are saying that actually it's fear and this feeling that has been done to them that's actually getting in the way. So thank you for sharing and contributing to that. And you know, rest assured, there is no right or wrong on these things. Everybody has different views. Now, I mentioned earlier on that we had a little formula for you. This little formula I introduced at the start of the webinar, which was E plus R equals O. Now, I want to just give you a little bit of background where I picked this up from. I picked it up from one of the kind of known gurus around the whole area of success, a guy called Jack Canfield, who's probably best known for his book, you know, The Success Principles, one of my favourite books. And what he talks about is all change is ultimately an event at the end of the day. It's an event or a situation we've actually got to deal with. And we, as individuals, in any situation, get to choose how we respond in that situation or to that event, you know, and how we actually respond impacts on the outcome. And I think we probably all get, you know, this basic formula, you know. So if in relation to change we decide that we're actually going to go into resistance mode, it's going to be really difficult to make progress. We're going to end up getting frustrated. We're probably going to even find that relationships actually break down within our organisation, between partner organisations. We end up with tough wars being developed. But on the other hand, if you look at it differently and say, well, if we actually acknowledge that some sort of change in what we do is almost inevitable, then actually we start to look at it very differently and say, well, okay, you know, I would rather it just be the same as it always is, but the reality is it's not the same as it always is, and we need to change. It really is a lot down to us, how we actually choose to respond, because that really is what impacts on what we actually do. And the truth is, in times of change, you know, the mindset we adopt really matters. A lot of people think that mindset is one of those kind of things of, you know, popular psychology, and it's all kind of a bit gobbledygook. But actually, if you think about it, during the course of the day, lots of things come into our mind, lots of different views and ideas, prejudices come into our mind, positive things come into our mind, and there's literally, you know, thousands of thoughts come into our mind. And so our mindset does really matter. And what we're really looking for in times of change is we want to replace the ants with the pets. Now, again, that was another kind of little acronym that I came up with at the start, the ants and pets. So let's explain what we mean by that. Ants are these things called automatic negative thoughts. These are those automatic negative thoughts that come up when we are faced with change, or faced with uncertainty, or faced with something that's a little bit different. So in relation to this change that we're dealing with in the NHS, you know, people might be thinking, well, you know, I'm too old, employers don't want any people of my age, they only want people who are the young, up and coming, rising stars. People like me haven't got a hope. That would be one of the automatic negative thoughts. People might think, well, you know, I'm only at a junior level in the organisation. It's okay for the people who are directors and deputy directors. They're going to get sorted out. They're going to have the networks. They're going to get looked after. Again, perfectly natural. People might be thinking, well, I've got all the wrong types of experience. You know, all of my experience is in strategic health authorities. All of my experience is in PCTs, it's in commissioning, it's working with GPs. I don't know anything about the hospital environment. I don't know anything about mental health trusts. I don't know anything about ambulance services. I've got all the wrong type of experience, or the kind of work I'm doing is not the right work. People can get into this automatic negative thought that, you know, they'll never get another job. You know, I'm an NHS person, that's what I've done, that's what I bring to the table, and I'm never going to get another job. And you can, as people have said, you know, when we did the question earlier on, you know, there's kind of this feeling of, goodness, well, nobody cares about us, you know, we're finance, you know, they don't care about us when times are good, so why are they going to care about us when things are not so good? And these are all the automatic negative thoughts. And I'm guessing you can get that if you are in this zone of being thinking about everything negatively, it's going to be difficult to really embrace what's actually happening. But on the other hand, what we want to do is we want to try and reduce, because you're never going to completely eradicate those automatic negative thoughts. It might be nice to think we can, but I think in reality we all have them. I have them, you have them, everybody's on this call probably has them. And what we want to try and do is replace those automatic negative thoughts with more of the performance enhancing thoughts. So let's look at what we mean by performance enhancing thoughts. Well, you know, it might be you're saying to yourself, well, okay, you know, this is difficult, it's not great, but actually I've dealt with this in the past, and sometimes it can be really, really positive if just to actually sit down and look at all the difficult challenges you've actually dealt with in the past. Those might not just be professional things, they might actually be personal things too. You know, I know that I've gone from being basically a school leaver with basic qualifications to a qualified accountant to somebody who's now, to a director, to somebody who's now running their own business. And there's been ups and downs, but you deal with it, and we can deal with it. You can also start to say, well, actually, okay, I may not have the perfect experience, but I've got a lot of experience. You know, I'm a great believer that in any organisation, whether it's in the NHS or whether it's moving outside the NHS and doing something different, completely different, you can actually show that your experience is an asset. And that experience might be related to your years of service. It might be the kind of specific work you've done. During my career, I started off in the NHS. I did the first 8 years of my career in the NHS. I then worked for 4.5 years in a bank. I went back to the NHS. I then did 5.5 years in 2 of the big 4 accountancy firms, and then I came back to the NHS, and now I'm running one business. So really, you can always take your experience and look beyond it, because my simple analogy is that 80% of stuff that goes on in organisations and goes on in finance is immediately transferable. Of course, you don't know about the ins and outs of specific industries, but you can learn that. And there's always practical steps you can take. There's always things you can actually do. You can look at how you're actually presenting what you've got to offer. You can look at your interview techniques. You can go and take some courses. You can do some research via the internet. There's always practical steps that you can take. And if you can get into this mindset of saying, well, okay, this is difficult. I'd rather it wasn't happening, but actually I can deal with this. I can take action personally. I can actually look to sell my experience better or differently. Then it's always going to be a lot different. Now, one of the little techniques I wanted to introduce you to was this idea of perspectives, because perspectives are ultimately the way in which we look at situations. And actually, what tends to happen is when we take a different perspective on something, what tends to happen is, not only does our viewpoint change, but so does our energy, and so does our kind of, our feelings as well. So let's just demonstrate what I mean by this whole thing, perspectives and change, because what I've got done here is I've created a very, very simple perspectives wheel, and you could actually do this for yourself and plot your own stuff in here. You could do it with your team if you are leading a team of people through the change. So we're going to start at kind of 2 with this factor that, well, this change, it's all unfair, it's just all horrible, it's just, I'm being dumped upon, we're the people in primary care and in strategic health authorities, we're the people in the jobs that are maybe seen as not at where the action is, so it's just kind of unfair, structurally changing, not seen as valuable. Now, if you think about it, when you hear me say those words, goodness, how are you going to be feeling in that kind of situation? You're probably going to be feeling completely flat in that situation. But on the other hand, if you say, well, actually, it is natural. Look what's actually happened over the period of time. I mean, look what's happened in the NHS. I can remember about 10 years ago sitting on steering groups looking at how we actually can reduce waiting times from 18 months to 15 months. Look where we are now. And we probably all thought at that time, oh goodness, this is going to be a bit tricky. But it's all come through. And actually, if we just say, well, actually, it's kind of natural. We've got to embrace it. We've got to, just adopt new ways. We've got to recognise that the landscape's changing. It feels very different. Similarly, if you get into the mode of feeling this is completely wasteful, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of energy, it's a waste of effort, again, we're back in the negative state. If we say, well, actually, it's a chance to take stock. When I was leaving my job as a director of finance, not going to anything else, it was actually a real chance to take stock and decide what was next for me in my career. And this could be a chance for everybody on this webinar and everybody affected by the change to take stock too. But then again, we're upbeat if we think on that way, but I think it's the end of the world. Everything's going to come to an end. The truth of the matter is, once we've got the basics covered, like the roof over our head, like the food on the table, and can cover our basic bills, actually, everything else after that's a bonus. So if we get at that end of the world, this is the only thing I can possibly do, it's going to be negative, it's going to be flat. If, by contrast, we say, actually it's a new chapter, you know, it's life's about adventure, life's about change, life's about adapting, we see it as a new chapter, and we can, again, just a bit more open, we're ready to embrace things. And then the patient perspective, you know, if we look at it as patients are going to suffer, patients are going to benefit, well, patients might suffer, but they also could benefit too. So if we do have to get to a situation whereby, you know, there are more demands on people in community services, etc., then maybe that is beneficial for the patients because they're not having to travel. So again, really the point I just used in this perspective wheel is just to say to you that how we actually look at different things really influences our response. And if we can actually just kind of try on different perspectives around the change situation, it can actually shift us from really feeling down about it to feeling positive. Because, you know, the reality is what we focus on is what we get. So if we focus on the downside, it's all about stress, it's all about struggle, it's all about frustration, it's all about anger, it's all about anxiety. If we focus on the upside, what we tend to do is we get ourselves into action. We start making choices, we start taking personal responsibility, we start saying, actually, you know, it's down to me to make things happen. And we know that's just the nature of the beast. We know that when we actually focus on movement, we can actually focus on we can either push things away or we can pull things towards us. We've got that choice, but what we focus on, we get. So let's look at kind of dealing with change, and let's go on to looking at this area of dealing with change. I think the first thing to say, you know, in any kind of change situation, there are going to be things that you can control. So, you know, you can make a choice to go out and get new skills. You can look at maybe building relationships with somebody in a neighbouring partner organisation who's recruiting or building your network. You can look at maybe speaking to friends, past colleagues, reconnecting with them to say that your situation may change and you'd be open and available and on the job market. And you can control your attitude. You can decide whether you want to stay in the victim place or the moving forward place. Those are things that you can control. There's also things that you can influence. You know, you can influence how you're seen by others in the organisation, how you're seen by others in partner organisations. You can maybe influence how decisions are made about the department, who stays, who goes. You can have your say on how your manager and your manager's manager views you. You can influence, I think, a lot, whether you're somebody who they say, you know, this person is such an asset to the organisation, we can't let them go, as opposed to somebody who's saying, well, you know, that's the person who comes in, does the minimum and goes home. Those are things that you can influence. And actually, you know, there's also things that you can influence. You know, you can influence the government policy. We can't for a minute turn around and say, you know, we think the speed of change should be slowed down. There might be people in the further up the hierarchy who can do it, but us at a personal level, we can't influence that, the speed of change. We can't influence the size of the cuts. We can't influence things like whether you know, the PCT that I work in, you know, takes most of its people off to the new GP consortiums. We just can't influence those kind of things. And the truth of the matter is, we know this because we do this all of the time in the NHS. If you think about it, most of the time we're taking and dealing with government policy. We're in implementation, and we accept that. And I think sometimes we've just got to accept that in the context of this dealing with change. Remember, this is not personal. The media might say things like, oh, there's too many managers, and there's too many accountants, there's too many bean counters, all of that kind of stuff. But I think if you actually ask the average person on the street, most people understand that in any organisation, in any big organisation, you need people taking care of important things like finance and contracts and all those other things. And, the important thing is to be methodical in how you respond. It's easy to go with the flow and just kind of get swept along with everyone else. But I really encourage you to be methodical, be rational, form your own views, don't buy into all the groupthink on all this kind of stuff. It's really easy to buy into groupthink, but I found that if you can actually sit down and look at it rationally and kind of responsibly, it's much easier. Now, there's going to be some people who are in the situation whereby they perhaps have been sorted out job-wise, and they have got to deal with the impact of trying to do more with less. And I think in those kind of situations, there are some things that you've got to do. First thing you've got to do is sit down and reassess priorities. What really is priority and what isn't priority. Because I think it's very, very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that everything's got priority. I mean, I know that even myself running my own business, I've got to periodically sit down and just reassess the priorities and say, well, where do I need to focus attention? And people who are dealing with change, managing change after the event, need to be reassessing priorities. You need to be looking at workload. Let's not pretend that you can do the same level of work to the same standard with less and less people. You've got to look at the workload, and I would even go as far as saying you've got to look at things that you actually can eliminate. Because there's probably things that you're doing out of habit rather than absolute necessity. And this is the time to actually go through and put into practice all of the things we're suggesting others do. I'm not going to use the word efficiency because I don't like the word, but look at the things actually you're doing that are not really adding any value and you're doing it out of habit. Look at smarter ways of working. Look at how you can innovate. Technology is been fantastic. The progress with technology has been fantastic, and we need to make sure that in finance teams we're actually making maximum use of technology. We're making it work for us. I mean, we've got a classic example right now with this webinar of a smart way of using technology. We're using it. We're using essentially a conferencing facility where you can see the slides to get a message across to people in a fairly short period of time. And I think we've got, this is where finance people need to get into this real creative mode and really start to show that actually there is ways we can actually do things smarter. And the important thing is, whether you're somebody who ends up leaving an organisation or someone who is actually staying behind, it's really important that you support each other. Change situations are not easy. It's really vital that everyone supports each other. This is not a time for kind of forgetting about everybody else. People are going to have inevitable dips whilst other people are on the highs. The key is to make sure that we're actually supporting each other through those peaks and troughs. So I just want to summarise before we open up for the Q&A session. Because the reality is, I'm not going to sit here and say change isn't tough. Because actually, we all know change and major scale change, but it impacts on us personally and is potentially about our livelihood, is tough. But at the same time, we can't avoid change. We can't hide under the blanket and pretend that it's going to go away. It's not because, and And it's because, I think, in some respect, the public have got different expectations of the NHS and indeed of all organisations. Change really can be a catalyst for everyone. As I said to you, I was leaving a job as a Director of Finance for an acute trust. I had been in work continuously since I was 15 years old, straight from school. I was a Director of Finance. I didn't have another job to go to. And I knew that I had to make some big choices. So actually what I did was I made a decision to actually go out and speak to a career counsellor to really get to the nub of actually what it was that I was seen as being best at and what I really enjoyed doing. And I used that feedback from 360 feedback and all other stuff to actually be the catalyst to launch my business. Yes, it was scary, but it really was a catalyst for me. And I think changing situations throughout my career have always been a bit of a catalyst. And I think that for all the people on this webinar, change can be a catalyst. And ultimately, the thing you've got to remember is it's how you choose to respond that's going to make a difference. If you make the choice that what you're going to do is get stuck in the negativity and all the why it's wrong and you're kind of trying to resist it, it's always going to be difficult. But if you choose to say, actually, what we're going to do here is we're going to embrace this, I'm going to look for the opportunities, it's going to be a whole lot better. And it's going to be a whole lot different in terms of your outcomes. So that's it. I'm going to hand back to Guy now, who is going to take the lead on the Q&A session. Over to you, Guy.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Duncan, for that. That was very, very interesting indeed. It's certainly good to hear the bigger picture and see, hear the story from someone who's been through so much change in the NHS and actually hear their experiences. So yeah, if everyone would like to start thinking about questions, if you've got questions, just type them into the question panel where you typed in your answers earlier. And while I'm waiting for that, I'm going to kick off with one. And I think the gist of, certainly quite a lot of what you were saying earlier is it's actually not what happens to you, but it's how you deal with it that actually counts and makes a difference. So therefore, if it's down to you so much, how do you have any advice for learning how to stop yourself when you start to have these automatic negative thoughts, to actually turn it around and start to have the positive thoughts?
Yeah, it's a great question, Guy. And I think the first thing to say is that, those automatic negative thoughts aren't going to disappear. But I think that one of the techniques that I found is very, very helpful is if in the first instance you just acknowledge the fact that, the thoughts appeared, and actually then kind of stop and say, well, actually, is this real? Or is this just something actually I'm making up? Is this really how it is? And actually just stop and really challenge whether it's just something that's flitting into your head because that's what's expected, or is it something that you've got to pay attention to? So I think just becoming conscious of the fact that it could just be this negative reaction because you're going through a bad moment or a bad period. Is a huge step forward for most people.
Yes, okay, so being more mindful in your approach to life, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right, we've got a question here from Claire Lynch. She's asking, what's the best way to deal with people resisting the changes that you're trying to make?
Well, it's a great one because I know that this is a huge issue for kind of the NHS and also for people who are actually trying to implement change, like the finance people. I always say to people, when you're in a situation where you're trying to make any kind of change, you've got to think ahead about the kind of types of resistance that people are going to raise. So it's actually a bit about anticipating the kind of resistance that they're going to actually raised. So you're not thinking, on kind of on the hoof, really, for want of a better term, on this. You're actually really you're giving some thought to it. But I think the best thing you can always do in the first instance is really listen to the concerns of others, Guy, because I think it's very, very easy to be in a situation whereby you assume that people are just being obstructive. And the reality is that they're not always going to be obstructive. So for me, I think the first thing you've got to do is try and get behind and understand their position. Why is it that they are actually putting up resistance? And then I think that what you've also got to do in any kind of change situation, you've always got to try and almost paint the picture for people and always make the compelling enough case, because there's that old saying that turkeys don't vote for Christmas. And whilst that's kind of a bit of a kind of throwaway statement, there is a certain element about I think most people do like stability. We all, to a greater or less extent, thrive in stability, but we need to make sure that once we understand people's position, we don't try and force our own point of view on them. We need to make that compelling case. People need to see that the situation post the change is going to be better than others, and that requires influencing, it requires persuading, it really does often require a certain element of negotiation. And for me, sometimes actually what can happen in big organisations is you get a situation whereby people will tell you the 10 reasons why they can't do things. And sometimes just actually asking the question, so what is possible? Can actually just get people to stop, okay, maybe we could do X and Y, then you get into a dialogue, then you get people moving forward. So I think it's about being willing to listen to people's points of view. It's been willing to see different perspectives. It's about being willing to, I guess, make small steps forward, because I think sometimes what actually happens is we get into a situation whereby people just can't get their head around the thing. I mean, I can remember when I was in an organisation and we had a kind of, a gap of about £18 million. And £18 million, people just couldn't get their head around. It was just too big. So sometimes as finance people, we've got to break it into smaller little stages to make it comprehensible for people. So hopefully that's given a few suggestions for Claire on that point.
Yeah, that's very helpful, certainly. I mean, in any organisation, I suppose that the bigger organisation, that the more the chance of this happening, but quite often you're going to get people who are just naysayers, people who are just negative for the sake of being negative, possibly, or that's just their disposition naturally throughout life. Again, I suppose this relates to Claire's question, but what's the best way, do you think, of sort of dealing with people who are being obstructive, should we say?
Yeah, well, here's my take on this one, Guy, because I think that, I mean, if you look at a typical change situation and we think about a bell curve, so what you tend to find is that at one end of the spectrum, let's say the left-hand side, you probably got 5 or 10% of people who, who I'd call the raving adopters or the raving fans. Those are the people who will embrace anything because they just, they like you, think you're great, all that kind of stuff. They'll go with the flow pretty much on anything. At the other end is the group that you're talking about, is the, what I call the serial resistors. The people who, if you gave £1 million, you walked down, put £1 million on their desk and said, that's for you, they would come up with some reason to resist it. And then, I'd say that's like 5 or 10% of your people. And then there's your kind of, 80 to 90% of your people who are under the curve, who will either sit on the fence, who I call this for the moment the fence sitters. They're the people who will actually go with you, or the people who will actually not go with you, depending on how compelling a case you actually make for people. And my take on this whole situation is, if you actually want to get change implemented, you don't want to be focusing your energy on the two tails of the bell curve. You want to actually be focusing your attention on the critical mass, because ultimately, if you're going to get a change through, and if it's a major scale change through, you've got to change the hearts and minds of the masses. So my view always is don't allow yourself to get into a situation whereby the people who are just, I feel like, serial complainers are the people who basically stop any progress making. You want to pay attention to the critical mass, who are the people who are actually going to make it happen. Because at the end of the day, you know, the people who are the serial resistors have got to make a choice at the end of the day, and that choice might be that they move on and do something different. So that would be my take on that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So if there are any other questions that people have got, obviously we're coming towards the end of the session now. So now would be a great time to pop them in the box and get them through, so we can put them to Duncan. I mean, do you have any sort of I know you've talked a lot about your own real life experiences, Duncan, with being in organisations and seeing a lot of change. Are there any sort of anecdotes you could share with us for a couple of moments to talk about some of those?
I mean, I think I really think that for me, I think when I saw change being successfully dealt with, I mean, I think communication is obviously a huge part of it. I mean, I think you've got to make sure that I mean, you almost double or potentially triple the amount of communication you do, because I think that even if you've got nothing particular to say to people, just having that 10-15 minutes with people to actually just let them know that there actually is no change, it avoids a situation where you have people actually worrying about what might or might not be happening. Yeah. So I think communication is really key in any of these kind of situations. That's probably the most important thing I'd say in any of these kind of situations. Okay, fantastic.
Is there a best way to manage transition within an organisation? So obviously, we're talking here about change quite a lot, and that's the name of the game today, certainly. So is there a right way and a wrong way to manage transition, do you think?
I mean, I don't think I think it'd be wrong. I think it'd be wrong to say there's a right or a wrong way. I don't think there is a right or a wrong way to kind of deal with transition. I think it's a case of just actually taking it as it comes and finding out actually what's right in the situation. For me, I think in any kind of transition, it's all about making sure that you have, I think just remain human and actually accept, understand that people are going to have the worries. But transitioning, for me, it's actually just kind of realising too that it's actually a change situation, and there's going to be a period of, inevitable uncomfortableness as you adapt to the new situation.
Chris Criswell sent through an interesting question. He's saying there are times when obviously you've got to use your professional judgment to, to take a look at what's going on. What happens if without thinking that you're, say, a negative person yourself, but you're seeing a bunch of changes happening that you're not wholly behind? How do you recognise the rare occasions when it would be appropriate to oppose or seek to modify these changes?
Well, I mean, it's a really interesting one. I mean, I think there's a huge thing about the scale of a change you're actually dealing with, because I think it would be fair to say, Guy, that if it's something that's actually, just so out your comfort zone, it might well be actually what you need to say is, I need to actually get away from this organisation completely, or this sector, if the changes that are getting imposed are such that you really just can't buy into them and you can't adopt. You're not willing to adopt or not willing to accept them. It's probably time to look at pastures new. So I think for me, it's always about asking yourself a question: is this a showstopper or isn't it? because
okay.
I mean, showstoppers will be different for different people.
Sure. Yes, I can appreciate that. Okay. Good one from Graham here. He says, as change is not instant, how do you recommend to deal with people who are on their way out, i.e. those who are forgotten but not gone, if you like?
I think that the people who are on their way out, I think what you've got to do is continue to provide great support on those things. I mean, I think that the question I'd always ask yourself is, if I was the person who was actually moved out of the organisation, how would I want to be treated in this situation? And I think if you keep that as your overall guiding principle, you'll make sure that you're supportive of those people. No matter what they're going to be doing next, whatever they're going to be involved in next. I mean, for some they might be retiring, for some they might be going off to a new job. But I think that whilst they're still part of your organisation, you want to make sure they continue to be involved. And if there are people who are actually going to be leaving completely, then you want to kind of make sure that they leave the organisation with in the best frame of mind they possibly can, even if it's not necessarily in circumstances of their choice.
Okay. Yes, good stuff. Right, well, we're just about out of time now, so I think we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you very much indeed, Duncan, for that session, and obviously indeed to all of you that have joined us on the call today. Don't forget you can access a recording of this webinar via the HFMA website. We're going to send you a link as soon as it's ready, and also I'll be emailing a feedback form. I'd be very grateful if you could fill that in, as that helps us to prepare for future sessions. So that's it for this series of webinars. I really hope that you found them useful and that it provides you with some sort of support.